and we had 10 people signed up, and then we had that wasn't counting me and Fred, so we should have a dozen people here, assuming everybody shows up. Hi, Cameron. Nice to see you.
Hi, Barbara. How you guys
Nice
doing?
to make it.
Hey, doing good.
Good.
You're an important voice in the conversation.
I have some good news.
Great.
So I watched your curb cuts. I watched it on the video. Maya sent it to me. And she also sent it to the general manager of the Isla Vista Rec and Park District. And I'm one of the board members on it. And we're going to go together on a walk around our property in Isla Vista to try to identify places to do curb cuts.
That's wonderful. You know, I had, like 4 years ago, we had some interns in from UCSB, and one of their assignments was to go and do that, but it was like the time wasn't right, and they were kind of intimidated, and nobody was really interested, and we didn't know who to connect to. So it's just so exciting and rewarding to hear that that is happening. So remind me, Isla Vista is not part of the city of Goleta, so you're in unincorporated
Yeah,
county?
it's unincorporated, but we have two local government bodies now. For a long time, we've had the Rec and Park District, and as of like 2016 or 2017, we've had a Community Services District as well. But also it's most decisions will also go through the county, I think.
That's great. Yeah.
Although it gets a little confusing. But yeah, with this, we have the benefit of the Rec and Park District being on board with the idea. So we have a lot of staff that spend a lot of time out in the parks and the streets and kind of know which ways the water usually goes, and could probably be really helpful for trying some curb cuts.
Yeah, that's great. And there are, I just want you to be aware, Cameron Benson here, who is part of our discussion today, is the head of the Santa Barbara Creeks Division. And they've done numerous curb cuts and learned from them. So they, Cameron, I'm offering you as a resource before checking in with you. But I thought it would be good for you to know each other.
Nice.
Sure. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I'd be happy whenever you're ready, Barbara, to answer any questions and talk about what we've learned and our experience. And it's not just the Creeks Division that's done some of these. Our Public Works Department has installed several, and lots of different designs. So we're kind of in the early stages, and we're installing lots of different kind of pilot designs, and then we go out when it's raining and we try to take a look at what's happening so that we can see what's best for what type of area.
That's really good. Serena, are you, can you unmute? Are you available? I see your name, but I don't see any activity from you. I did get an email from you this morning about joining, so maybe not. Okay. Well, this meeting has really, and Julie, you're welcome, and you're welcome to unmute or unmute whenever you want to speak. The whole idea of the meeting is, the reason that this follow-up is a meeting and not a webinar is so that everyone has an opportunity to freely talk among themselves. It's a little more difficult in the webinar format. You have to do the chat and questions and answers, and just the presenters and the host can speak freely. So that's why this follow-up for people to see each other, talk about, you know, if they're in different areas of the county and want to work together on that particular area and the regulations. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this meeting. So it's kind of a free flow meeting, and I'm glad that you started out, Ash, in terms of, you know, what people want to do. It's kind of, in my vision for this meeting, it's partly about connecting people to each other, connecting people to resources, connecting people to, you know, the agencies that they can get information from and do advocacy for, um, about, you know, learn more about best practices. So that's kind of the idea of the meeting. So having community involvement is really important, and it does really feel like there's been a shift, and these practices are starting to happen, which is really exciting for me.
One thing I was thinking of was when we actually we discussed it with Cameron previously about trying to identify potential locations for curb cuts, and it's kind of what you were talking about, Ash, of just walking around, actually surveying, looking at places and evaluating them as far as how appropriate they would be for all the different reasons we discussed of what works and, you know, or doesn't work, but just helping to identify potential curb cut locations to bring light so that, you know, City of Santa Barbara or other government agencies can kind of like get kind of aware of the different locations, because I think it's we have the ability to spot things and kind of start essentially a list of potential cut sites or things that look promising, and then they can be evaluated and such as that. But I think there could be some kind of grassroots effort in helping to identify potential locations. I think that could be something helpful, at least to the Santa Barbara Creeks Division. And then the other aspect of that is the kind of the adopt a curb cut sort of thought of people being willing to actually kind of take a little bit of ownership of the maintenance, or just kind of checking to be sure things are clear so that they're functioning properly. So I think there's some organizing that could happen around those projects, particularly identifying, you know, preliminary. There's a first step, identifying locations that would be suitable, and just compiling a list of those things that can then be evaluated. I think that would be a good kind of starting place, and it sounds like that's kind of what you guys are doing out there. You know, IV, looking at, you know, just kind of evaluating, walking around and starting to look at places and saying, well, what about this spot? Or why not this place or that place? So I think that's a kind of would be a valuable place to maybe try to organize, is around the identification of potential sites.
And I think that when we talk about that, it's good to consider what makes a good location for a curb cut. And Cameron actually sent us this list that I'm going to read off of, and I could make this available to people in the meeting afterwards. But things to consider when looking at a potential curb cut location. So there's slope, parking, trip hazards, ponding, street trees, landscaping, maintenance, grades or elevations, driver, bicyclist, pedestrian safely, soil type, contamination, depth of the groundwater, adjacent land use, historic resources, and archaeological resources. So that's just some ideas, and he said in no particular order. I wanted to add a couple things that Art Ludwig had talked to me about in terms of let's see. I have a hard time reading my notes, but he was talking about just looking at the curb cuts on Modoc Road and some things that he noticed. Um, he said making the inlet angled so it doesn't have to turn a right-hand corner for the water to get in. So I was having a hard time visualizing actually how it was turned. I guess it's if the water's flowing this way. Anyway, if the inlet would be angled like off of the street in a way so that it invites the water in. This actually isn't about location, but actually more about design standards. And
Yeah, that's a good, that's a good point and an interesting idea, because when water's flowing, it doesn't just make a right turn unless you've got unless you're really able to create an angle for the water to drop down. It's going to be moving. So for some distance past the beginning of your opening, so if you have an opening like this, the water will flow this far past your opening before it starts entering the cut. And so you've got sort of wasted space where if you were able to kind of turn that design a little bit, you create an easier path for flow. That's totally logical. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody do it. So that's Art's got a great mind for design, and and experience. So that's a good suggestion and one we can try for sure.
Yeah, and I'm trying to see, because he said that if the water changes direction, it slows down, and that means that it's going to drag in sediment. And so having it move quicker would be more valuable. And then the basin needs to be several inches deeper in the flow rate. That actually doesn't make sense to me, but
well, I would say a couple things on that. One is if you're slowing water down, sediment drops out. It doesn't pick up sediment. Sediment's picked up when the water is traveling faster. So you have scour and erosion.
Yeah. So here it's saying it has to change direction. When it does, that it will want to slow down, and when that does, it will drop the sediment. I'm sorry, I didn't read that right. So then changing direction would be a good idea, right?
Well,
what do you think, Fred? Or Cameron?
When you've got that runoff, it often is carrying fine sediment, and that will clog pores in the soil and make your soil less permeable. And I'm not really sure how to deal with that exactly. I think in your webinar in your some of the designs you showed had sort of pre-treatment type things. So you have like a catch basin maybe acts as a settling pond. So that will be a place that water can go. It'll slow down. It'll drop out sediment, and just the water at the surface spills over into your infiltration area. And those can be effective as long as those areas are maintained. There's not a downside to them. There's a limitation to them, and that is, when you have a big storm, those kind of things get overwhelmed, can be overwhelmed pretty quickly, because the volumes that you're talking about in urban areas, the volumes of runoff are so huge. And so you often get a lot of water. And then I guess, to Art's design point, and then you don't want that water swirling around in your pretreatment basin, because then you're suspending all of those fines in the water column and they're all spilling over into you want that water to be still. It's a stilling, eddy pool. You guys talked about eddy pool, but it's you want that water to slow down so that as much sediment as possible can drop out. And then those things have to be maintained. Somebody has to go and pull a manhole cover or something like that and get that sediment out of there. so that it's available for future storms.
So I have a question about the difference between a lot of the curb cuts and basins that I had worked on are filled with mulch instead of, gravel and then soil. And so it's like the gravel and soil seems to be a more engineered solution, and I'm wondering why that gets chosen out of instead of just a mulch basin. Because in the mulch basin, the sediment can drop in, and then it can stay as the mulch is changes to a biologically rich soil over time, and that seemed like a good solution for me. And I'm just wondering, and simpler. So why is that not chosen more often? Is there something that I'm missing that makes that not as desirable?
Well, in my experience, what I see is I should step back a second to just say, in the city of Santa Barbara, we have regulatory requirements for redevelopment. So private properties and public right of way, for example, are redeveloped, there are requirements, water quality protection requirements that require this runoff water to be captured and infiltrated into the ground. And we've just revised those requirements, and the new requirements go into effect 1 week from today on March 1st.
Right.
So when somebody is, so then now to get to answer your question specifically, when somebody is required to capture a certain volume of water from an area of their redevelopment, we look at that and we say, okay, you have to catch the design storm, which is a 1-inch storm in 24 hours. And they have to have capacity, they have to be able to show the capacity and volume for how they're going to get that volume of water into a place where it can infiltrate. And so if you use gravel, you have more void space than if you use mulch, just at the design level. And I know Art, I've talked to Art a lot. I know the mulch, I have my whole yard's mulched, so I know how that works, and I know that it's effective. But from when you're environmental regulations are very difficult to try to write to capture that. So somebody needs to be able to show us, because we need to be able to show the water board how we're in compliance with our permit. And so if you're using gravel, we know what the void space is in angular gravel, and it's 25 to 30%. So somebody can, in a smaller space, they can capture the required volume than if you were using mulch. And Art's experience, and I'm seeing the same thing, so I believe it, is that over time, that mulch will improve the health of the soil. It improves, and in improving the health of the soil, you increase the permeability, porosity of that soil and its ability to infiltrate water. But we need to be able to show to the water board, because we get audited on the city's stormwater discharge permit, how did you approve this? Where did you have capacity? And we can't answer with, well, they agreed to put mulch in here for the next 10 years, and then we're going to have the capacity. We need to be able to show capacity now. So that's a main reason. But we do have, we do, in our new guidance manual, we do discuss using mulch as a way to improve the health of the soil, and as part of a design in a yard area, for example. So, where I used to have lawn in my yard, I now have a berm, and it's all complete, it's all mulched, and it infiltrates just a lot of water that runs off my neighbor's yard into my yard.
Oh, that's really interesting to me, your answer, and I appreciate it, because I've been trying to figure out for years, because mulch has been kind of our standard to use.
So we do use that. So it's depending on the location, and we have to work with our parks division at the city, who is charged with maintaining landscaping and things like that. We have to work with the public works department, who controls the right of way and what gets built there. And then we have design review boards that we have to work with depending on the location. So we're with the Architectural Board of Review, or if it's in the historic part of town, we're at the Historic Landmarks Commission. And so we have aesthetic considerations, but in a lot of locations where someone has built a shallow swale as a best management practice for capturing water, not necessarily a curb cut to get it from the road, but to capture all the water running off a sidewalk. Mulch is the cheapest and most effective thing to put in there, and it's easier to maintain. It keeps weeds down. I mean, it's, for a lot of reasons, it's a good solution, and the city has approved that in a lot of different locations. What we may be lacking is what you mentioned earlier, which is having somebody that, it would be great to have a neighbor, somebody nearby, who kind of tended that or paid attention to that. Let us know, if the mulch, if it needs more mulch, or if they're going to put some mulch in it. It just makes it a lot easier. The city's got a lot of area to maintain, and it's a challenge to keep up with it. And so, where you have somebody who's willing to do that, I think we would have the most success with that kind of thing, with that kind of design.
So I have two questions. One of them is, my understanding about gravel is that it becomes less sustainable over time, and more that voided space becomes filled in with sediment, right, over time. So something that was approved at the moment of the design standard, that there was a certain amount of voided space, that's the issue with, French drains and just a whole bunch of, methods that people have been using to infiltrate stormwater. So, but there's no follow-up. It's like, once you get approved and gravel's okay, then you're just okay with the gravel, and they don't realize that, like, the mulch will make it better over time, but the gravel will make it worse.
Well, everything needs to be maintained. That's the fact of the matter. So we have to have something that complies when it's approved, but there's a requirement that it be maintained in perpetuity as well.
Okay.
And so we do go out, and we're required under our permit to go out and do inspections of BMPs that people have installed. And, one thing we learned with our permeable paver parking lots, streets, gutters, everything that we've done, is if there is run-on coming from another location. So those things are excellent for any rain that falls right on top of them. They need very little maintenance, and they are effective for many, many years without maintenance. But if you have run-on that's bringing those fines into a curb and gutter situation where you have permeable pavers, the joints get filled with fines very quickly, and that's little gravel that's at the top of that. But what we find is those fines only penetrate, a half inch. The deepest we've seen that stuff penetrate is less than an inch. So for maintenance, we don't need to remove all of, and then underneath that, especially in a roadway, you may have 24 inches of unsanded, open graded aggregate. So we can come along there with some kind of vacuum and pull that little bit of small gravel out of the joint, and then just, if we can take that top half inch, the rest is still clean underneath, and we can sweep in some new gravel, and then it's like brand new again. But the same is true if you had a mulch basin that was taking runoff in every storm. So,
But they need to be maintained.
A right-of-way is different from something in your yard. So right-of-ways, and things in public areas, they take a lot more abuse. So you have people walking on them and compacting that soil and stuff. And if it's like in my yard right now, if I walk out there, the soil is fluffy. it doesn't get, my dog's running around out there all the time, but it's not compacted. And in the right of way, things often get compacted, and you just have so much more, you know, anytime we get a quarter inch of rain, those gutters are flowing into those spots and they're carrying those fines in there. And so in the void space in the soil gets clogged by those fines. And so you have to scarify the soil or do something to it to aerate it somehow to give it a chance to get that layer of fines off the top. So everything requires every design requires some maintenance. What we're looking for is, what is the best one? What does realistic maintenance look like? We talked about the pre-treatment basins. So we've worked with our public works department, and we went back and forth about, because we wanted them to do the pre-treatment catch basin as a bottomless catch basin. And you need to have something in there to dissipate energy of water falling off the street level down to the bottom. And so we've gone with some designs that have ungrouted boulders about this size, and that allows that to be an infiltration basin. But then you can go in, and when you get a foot of mud on the top of it from the fine settling out, you can scrape down to the boulders and kind of restore some of that. But we've had some people argue, well, isn't it easier to maintain concrete bottomed structure? Because then you can have a machinery or a person with a shovel go down and scrape out down to the concrete, and then you know you're at the bottom.
But it can never really infiltrate if there's concrete.
It won't infiltrate. It won't infiltrate from there. So you do need to figure out solutions for vector control, mosquitoes and things like that. You don't want that water sitting in there ponded for more than, I think 72 hours is the max, but they don't really want, they say 48 hours if you ask the vector control guys, but it's really 72 hours is the max that you would want ponding. Got it, Ash. Yeah. So we have tended to prefer the design with the with cobble at the bottom, because it dissipates energy. It still allows the infiltration, and then really that's just your pre-treatment. That's your settling basin. And so when you scrape it out, it may not infiltrate as fast, but you still do get that infiltration, which helps avoid vector problems.
So my other question is, if people were interested in helping to maintain basins, do you have, or curb cuts, do you have a list of places that are already needing of citizen maintenance that would be helpful? Or is this just as we put in more and more curb cuts that people could?
I don't have a list, but we could.
That's what Matt was talking about, making the map, right?
He was talking about making a map of potential new locations. We could. What I was sort of waiting for with that was he was going to work on a map to show potential locations, and then when we had that map and saw what format it was in, we were going to see if we could add to that and make a map and show where curb cuts and things like that have already been installed. Technically under the municipal code for the city of Santa Barbara, at least, each property owner is responsible for maintaining the parkway in front of their property. And so, but people do that to varying degrees. Some you see these wonderfully landscaped, just beautiful parkways, and some are, people just poured concrete over where it used to be landscape, and that is illegal in the city to concrete those areas, but it's been done in a lot of places, and we've gone around and removed it in certain locations. And so we've got a program we're slowly, proactively going out and looking for those, which provides a great partnership with Sweetwater for what you're talking about, partnership with the community.
Did you get my email about that when I gave you a whole list of them?
Yeah, so to affirmatively go out and do that, But then we also have the, the incremental changes over time. So as our public works department is coming through and redeveloping the roads and sidewalks across the city, now they're required under our stormwater rules to address runoff pollution as part of their project. So those things are being built into projects all the time as projects are going forward.
Yes.
It's maintenance and repair is exempt from that, but anytime they're sort of redeveloping an area. So that's why you see there's a large public works project that's building that multi-use bike path from along Modoc and Las Positas that Art referenced, and there are curb cuts in that, and there are BMPs in place for the multi-use bikeway where there's essentially well, like a French drain, but there are infiltration trenches on the sides of the bike path so that water will run off and go and drop down and infiltrate on the sides of the bike path.
So I guess my other question is, somebody had written and said after the webinar that she was interested in sponsoring a curb. If she was interested in sponsoring a curb cut, how much would it cost? And I said, I didn't hear back from her, but I said, if you're talking about adopting one, it's maintenance. It's not really, there's no fees or anything involved. It's just the time of you going out there and checking it and cleaning sediment and making sure everything is, clear. So I think that maybe coming up with some kind of task list or letting people know what's involved. We can put out a call to action for people who are interested in adopting curb cuts. And I was thinking that these would mostly be in areas where it wasn't in front of someone's residence. That's when we would have the need for someone to adopt one because there isn't a resident there to take care of it. And what
I would think the low-hanging fruit might be in front of somebody's residence. So they have a parkway. Yeah, because they're there all the time. So they get to see it. They see how it's working. They're kind of monitoring it all the time instead of a place that they would have to go to. And so I think that having in front of somebody's business or somebody's residence is a good idea, and it just makes it kind of natural. You see it every day when you walk out. You get to kind of be excited when it rains. So you get to go out and look and see how it's working and then troubleshoot from it. And the answer for the cost, depending on how many of these we're doing or how many people are interested in this, the Creeks Division is looking for these locations that really are ideal for this. And so depending on what that demand looks like, we have to look at what our funding, how much funding we have for that, but we would be able to go forward and do some more of these. And I want to stress that not related to a project. We're not allowed to use our funding for mitigation for a development project. So these would be just affirmative water quality improvement projects that are unrelated to some other development project. And so we would come in and evaluate and come up with a design that would be suitable for a specific location and put that in. And we've done a variety of different designs. We, being the city, has done a variety of different designs, and so we have some different options that might be available for specific locations. We have some that have infiltration chambers, so that they give us a lot of void space. They create a lot of void space and can take water quickly, at least in the initial part of a storm, sort of the first flush part of the storm. We have swales. We have the pre-treatment catch basins that spill over into either a swale or an eddy infiltration basin or or stormwater chambers. We have porous type of pavements, permeable pavers, porous asphalt, porous concrete. We do try to steer people away from, particularly from porous asphalt, because of for two reasons. One, there's not a good way to flush that back out and clean it. Same with porous concrete. But with the asphalt in particular, you've got hydrocarbons in the material itself. And so you've almost got a pollution source there, and then you're sending the water through it and counting on the soil underneath that to essentially treat those hydrocarbons. So that's an allowable way to get water to infiltrate, but not necessarily preferred. So we have a lot of different options to look at, and for designs, and those constraints that you mentioned, most of them are not deal breakers, but they do show you that, wow, as we've gotten more and more into it and more experience, there are a lot of things to consider when you're looking at this.
So a nice apron of rocks. Oh, nice. No ecovista. An apron of rock as coming into the curb cut, coming into the basin, and then mulch is not allowed, just mulch, because you can't prove the amount of void space.
No, in this case, so that I'm glad you brought that up, Barbara, because this is super important. In this case, in the case of somebody doing a development project, or the Public Works Department redesigning several blocks of a street and redeveloping that, they have volumetric requirements that under the city's stormwater discharge permit that we must meet. So, so for example, so let's say you've got a 5,000 square foot of roadway or right-of-way redevelopment, you need to capture the runoff from a 1-inch storm for that entire 5,000 square feet. So it's 0.623 gallons of water per square foot. And so you're looking at, for 5,000, you're looking at whatever that is, am I thinking 30,000 gallons of, I can't do the math in my head.
Yeah.
So so you have to be able to demonstrate that you have that capacity. If you're doing something as a voluntary project, we don't have those same volumetric requirements. These are just icing on the cake, so they don't have the volumetric requirements. So the answer is, you have much more flexibility in your design. You're not trying to hit a certain number of gallons. It's good when you can do that. You want to try to increase your capacity, but you don't have those same permit requirements. So opening something up that will get some of that water in and put it into a mulched parkway is good. That's good stuff, and we'll do it. We don't have to catch all of the water for the whole block.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to know.
The other thing too, on the mulched basin, a lot of volumetric, measurement of the basin is in the basin itself. There has to be a large enough base to capture the volume you're looking for. Even if it's mulch, it's not mulched. The mulch isn't filling in the entire basin like gravel is in an infiltration chamber. So you're creating a detention pond, a pond essentially of a certain volume that is lined with mulch. So the volume is, Barbara, primarily a function of how much excavation you've done, how much of a receptacle you've created to receive the water. And so the mulch is just the at the infiltration surface, the mulch is just improving the permeability of the infiltration surface and allowing for speedier infiltration of the volume that you've captured in the size basin that you created at the depth, and the cubic feet of basin that you've created is what determines how many gallons of water you can capture. And then the mulch is more the driver of the permeability and infiltration rate of the soil that underlie the basin. So I think that's the important thing to think of in considering mulch basins, is that you're creating a pocket that has a certain capacity, and then you're lining it with mulch, and you're not necessarily anticipating filling that entire void with mulch. Like you might if you were doing an infiltration chamber with gravel, with angular gravel in it. You'd be considering the volume inside of that, matrix of gravel as being your volume. So I think the two are sort of just looked at a little differently. But there's no reason that you can't create basins that are quite large. I think that's where the design questions start to get interesting. Is I know there's a concern about safety of deep infiltration basins and parkways that people might trip or fall or whatever. But certainly those questions have been successfully resolved in other municipalities around the nation satisfactorily, that you can create deep enough basins to really be meaningful as far as the cubic feet of water that they capture. And then they're lined in mulch and planted out so they have good infiltration rates inside of the basin. But the volume of capture is just really what space there is there to capture that water. So I think that's where the two different approaches are, diverge. Is the gravel basin is not really intended. The capacity is within the structure, within the interstitial parts of the gravel is the capacity of that, whereas in a mulched basin, you're really trying to dig a big enough basin itself to capture the volume you want. And then it's that mulch that is the infiltration, that assists in the infiltration part of it, in increasing the receptivity of the infiltration surface at the bottom of the basin.
So I want to look at the chat because some of our other participants have been, I wish everyone would just feel free to talk. I'm not trying to hog the time, but just passing the time by asking questions of Cameron. And I did want to bring up some of the questions that you had, Serena, and now you had one. But first, I'm going to go back to Ash. I haven't pressed where do I see the chat?
Yeah, I said I'm also interested in porous surfaces, and I'm really glad we're having this today because I wanted to get in touch with Sweetwater about collaborating in general, because part of this group called EcoVista, and we're going to be working on a community development plan where it goes by a lot of different names. Sometimes we're calling it like a grassroots Green New Deal. Sometimes we're calling it like a bottom-up climate resilience plan. But our concept is to give feedback for the county planning process and, catalyze other projects in IV. And part of that I'm thinking about is like, instead of adding more concrete, we add like porous surface things and whatever else we could do to manage rainwater better and stuff like that.
Well, we'd love to be involved with that. And I'm trying to remember, we've worked with, God, her name is just, we worked with someone who's involved in EcoVista, and I'm not remembering her name right now. But
Yes.
yes, yeah. We worked with her. She got us. She's the one who got us involved in the community gardens out there, and the student family gardens out there in Isla Vista. Right. Yeah. I will reach out to you more, Ash, about um, collaboration. And I just want to touch on what Serena and I have had longer conversations about her concern. And Serena, you can feel free to break into this conversation, interrupt me if you want, because I'm just paraphrasing what I heard from you. Serena has been concerned about stormwater on, steeper hills in Santa Barbara because so much of our area is hilly. And she mentioned things like the speed of the water coming down, like Portezuelo, near the junior high, and that it's interfering with bicyclists and just the idea of, she originally thought that when we were talking about curb cuts that there was something else that she had seen which was used in steep places to help slow the path of water. And I'm also wondering like what Creeks has done in those situations, but my understanding is that, because we don't want to infiltrate too much water on slopes because of stability, that things that we could do to create either plantings that would anchor places, like maybe putting in bulb outs with plantings to help slow water down or create kind of circular paths that would slow water down by being more windy, or um, you know, putting them into storm drains and then taking them through pipes to creeks. I mean, I don't know. Those are just some things I was thinking of as possible alternatives to kind of like the curb cut idea, because my understanding is that you don't do it over, the design standards are over after a certain amount of slope that you don't do curb cuts. So
Well, I would say a couple things. First to Ash, I'm super stoked to hear about your plan and EcoVista. This is the first time I've heard of it, so I'm glad to hear about that. That's really cool. And what I would say is one of the things we try to promote is avoidance of using hard surfaces as much as possible in any kind of development. So unless you need it for a specific purpose, just don't pave it. That's the, it's like kind of the first do no harm thing for doctors. But if you need something for structural support, you've got fire trucks, trash trucks, vehicles, and that kind of thing. If you need something with that kind of support, we found permeable pavers to be the best alternative that we've come across so far. We're currently working with our public works department in the city of Santa Barbara to adjust the municipal code to allow for gravel driveways in appropriate locations. And so in those cases, we're talking about, a single vehicle coming in and out at a very slow rate of speed and that kind of thing, that is not a fire truck worthy access road, because the fire trucks can reach the structures from the street, things like that. We're looking at all those different safety factors, but it's an inexpensive, relatively inexpensive material for someone to use. It's got water quality benefits. There are aesthetic benefits. We've heard from some applicants in the city, but they do this all over Montecito and we think it looks really nice. So that's why they're proposing it. And then they find out there's water quality benefits, and then they find out the municipal code prohibits it. So gravel can be a good one, but if you really need to have access for big heavy vehicles, we found permeable pavers to be the best. And again, you want to try to limit runoff from other offsite locations onto that, because that's going to create a maintenance issue. But as for just taking care of the water that falls on them, they're great. Expensive upfront costs, but they'll reduce your maintenance costs. For example, for a roadway, we estimate that the life cycle cost is the same. even though the permeable pavers are much more expensive up front, they have much less maintenance going forward. You don't need to re-slurry them every 6 years. You don't need to replace them in 30 years like you do with an asphalt road. So an asphalt road, you actually build at least twice in the time of the lifespan of a permeable paver road.
Wow.
So that's a soapbox on that. And then with regard to slopes and curb cuts, there are several reasons. One, you mentioned about infiltrating water on slopes can cause instability in the soils in certain locations. So it's best to have a professional geotechnical person looking at that specific site. But just slowing the water, and there are practical considerations. So if you imagine you've got a steep slope like this of a roadway or curb and gutter, the water that's coming down there is moving so quickly. You have a curb cut and the water just zips right past it. So you need to have some kind of structure or barrier in place that directs that water. The water is still going to try to jump over that thing, but that directs the water in. But then imagine what the parkway looks like next to it. The parkway is not then flat. The parkway is still sloped as well. So if you're putting water in, all the water is going to go to one end of the parkway. And unless that's really deep, it's not going to hold much before it overtops. And then you got water flowing down the sidewalk, and you can have erosion and scour. So if there's if you have enough space to meander something, Barbara, like you mentioned, that's one way that you look at the natural systems with water. That's one way that water slows down. Another way, when you look at our creeks here, you'll see in steep sections, it's all cobble. It's all rock. So it's scoured all the soil away, and you've got rock there. So one of the best ways to slow water down is just to have ungrouted cobble. Which you can't necessarily put into the curb and gutter area, but you could have in a parkway. And there are some locations, particularly in islands and medians in the city, where the city has taken to put cobble in. And one example of that is the roundabout area down by Cliff Drive and Las Positas Road. The city Public Works Department did a big project there, and they have curb cuts and vegetated swales in some locations, and then they have ungrouted, probably 8 to 10 inch cobble in some of the island areas. Another project that's older, I noticed just driving down on Lower State Street the other day, they've got islands there with the same cobble, but it's all grouted and concreted in there. So that's just the same as having concrete. And that was, I think, done at a time before the city was really thinking about that. And it would have been cheaper, just less materials and easier just to put the ungrouted cobble in there. So, those are a couple of ways, but just trying to create some roughness element, that does a lot to slow water down.
So if somebody notices that there is a place in the city that they're concerned about stormwater, either like what she's saying right here in the chat is she thinks plantings would simply be swept away. As it is, the water jumps the curve and carries 1 to 2 inch gravel right out of the parkway onto the road. So would creeks respond to a call from a citizen who is concerned anywhere in the city about meetings, stormwater, to like revise stormwater management in a certain section? Could you put like medians and islands and with, ungrouted cobble into an area where there was, if a neighborhood was concerned, if a bunch of neighbors came together? Or?
We in the Creeks Division, we can take a look at that. There are people in this city. I mean, the city has a streets division that addresses the right of way and this kind of that kind of work in the right of way. Then the city has a parks division that maintains the vegetation in the medians and islands through the city. So there, it depends specifically on what the issue is. In terms of being able to look at something and a design of something, we can look at it, but some of these things really need to be engineered. You know, you need to have a civil engineer looking at them. If you're using if you're using 1 inch gravel in a place where you have water flowing through, you can, as she pointed out, you can count on the water's going to wash that away when you have a big storm. It's just not large enough for it sounds like in this case, it's not large enough for the volumes and velocity of the water moving through. But if that was, if that was cobble that was this size, and it was placed with some kind of barrier. So if you imagine a parkway, it has curb on one side, it has the sidewalk on another side, and so you've got these, it's sort of, you box in that cobble, and then water can move around it, but it's unlikely to move something that weighs that much.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you, Cameron. Serena also asked, is there any place to pick up free cobble like sandbags for storms? Well, there used to be after the mudslides.
Right. From time to time, the flood control district for Santa Barbara County Flood Control District has set those kinds of things up, but I don't know if they have one now. And generally, what I see is people are buying cobble.
Let's see, Tim. I'm wondering if you have any questions or comments, because you've been pretty quiet during this section and we're about to wrap up. And we want to hear from you if you want.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions about locations. I mean, since the seminar, I've been walking around the street, the neighborhood, and just, looking at places that might work. So, I always look at is like, well, how big does the catchment area have to be, to make it worth a curb cut? Is there a certain size of area for the catchment, or how small could it be, to make it work where water would, be able
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. And in our experience, usually the catchments are too large for the space that we have available for the curb cut. So if you imagine, most of the sidewalks in the city, at least when they're originally poured and put in, they have a positive drainage into the parkway area. And so, in a lot of places, if you just can catch the sidewalk, that is good. And you're not even getting to a curb cut yet, where you usually have a large volume coming off of the street.
Right.
So we would look at things, our preference would be to be able to be in locations where we could catch runoff coming off the street, but we could also look at things where we're just capturing sidewalk. So you have less volume, so that would be more like just a little bit of grading to do a slight swale and put some mulch in if that's acceptable for that area. So it's a pretty inexpensive project. You're not catching a lot, but it's also inexpensive to implement.
And for that kind of project, somebody does not need a permit if they're going to do it themselves?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I should ask Adam. Okay, it would be a public works I would have to find out from.
Right, and they may be able to tell you if there's any design criteria for that, or any reason that you'd have to go to ABR or HLC.
Okay, thank you. Go on, Tim. Something else?
Oh, I had a question before about, the curb cuts and if there are other ways to help direct the water in. I know we talked about the angle cut earlier that Art was talking about. And then last week, I think on one of the photos I saw where someone had built up a little asphalt to direct the water into the cut. And I guess if you had someone taking a sandbag out there every time it rained, that would work well. But then someone has to go clean it up or take it out. So I wonder if there are any other ideas about that.
It's a great question. It's something that we've worked. It's something that we've been working on because You know, even if you have a pretty flat road and you do your curb cut and you've got your opening, some of the water just wants to continue down the gutter. It doesn't want to make that turn. And things like the asphalt bump there, those are, you know, asphalt doesn't stick very well if you kind of throw it on after the fact, and having water constantly flowing over it will, you know, will chew those up pretty quickly. One of the concerns we have with, and we thought of, hey, maybe we can throw a sandbag out in our spot, but we noticed there's no street lights around the area where we were doing a pilot curb cut. And if somebody were riding a bicycle and we had that, and we, you know, and they're riding near the curb and gutter and we had a sandbag out there, they would go right over the handlebars. And so that really wasn't an acceptable option for us. And similar with putting those bumps in there, you know, you got a lot of bicyclists or pedestrians that might be walking in those areas, and we don't want to create a trip hazard. I've seen people kind of cheat it with a little bit of caulking, you know, so it's kind of a flexible thing. It's not very tall. If it's on a flat street, it kind of helps a little bit, but it's definitely not a perfect solution. It doesn't look good. It doesn't last long. And then ultimately you might end up with caulk in your runoff because whatever it turns into, plastic or some kind of microplastic, is washing off. So the best, it seems to me that the best thing to have is if you actually could, what do I want to call it? If you could grind your concrete down a little bit in the gutter, in the location of your opening, so that you've got a little depression there that actually sucks the water in, and it'll make the water go in the other direction, because then the water has that lip to climb back up out of. And once your curb cut, your parkway is full, and I think Fred talked about this during the presentation. Once that's full, the water will bypass. It'll backfill that little shallow grinded area, and the water will continue past it. So you don't create any flooding problems. You only need to grind a little depression there, so you don't create anything that's going to make somebody wipe out on a bicycle or twist their ankle or something like that. I think that would be the best approach.
Maybe get some groove cuts across.
That's a good idea, Tim. That's a good idea. I think, and that goes to Serena's comment. You know, any kind of roughness element you can create will slow the water down. If you're on a big slope, a lot of groove cuts aren't going to do very much. But if it's not very sloped, that's a great idea, and it's a simple one, because you just have your circular concrete saw right there, and you make a few cuts. I would just caution people, don't make them deep, so that we don't create we don't destabilize somehow the structure of the curb and gutter.
Thanks.
I just want to get back to Serena for a minute about the, anyway, and Ash, thank you so much. I will get back in touch with you.
I've got to run.
Yeah.
I've got to meet up with my colleagues, so I'm going to have to dash. But thanks, everybody, and sorry I've got to go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fred.
I need to leave as well, but I want to thank you guys for organizing this, and I'm sorry for talking so much.
No, I really appreciate it. I just want to say one sentence to Serena, and then I know we've run over and we've gone, but when I talked about plantings, there are specific native plants with very deep roots that are already on slopes all over the native areas of Santa Barbara, and that's what I'm talking about can be used to help slow down the stormwater on slopes. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll be in touch. Thanks very much, Cameron.
Okay, thank you guys. Bye-bye.